Now, this is a topic that is near and dear to my heart. Maybe because I spent years as a data analyst, then I was a business analyst before I ever got into product development, and obviously before I got to where I'm at now. So maybe I have a different appreciation for data and also the workflows and systems that are or are not in place that inform the completeness or quality of said data. So I recently ran into a situation, right, where there was a use case. We wanted to see if we could use AI to basically read hundreds of PDF documents. And the short answer is yes, right? I was able to develop a system that ingested, I think for this proof of concept, we ingested 200 PDFs. Then we used vector embeddings to contextualize them. We stored them in a vector database. Then I built a chat workflow using Slack that wrapped around it and also connected to HubSpot and the original files. So you could basically chat inside of Slack, ask questions of the PDFs. You could also pull back the actual original PDF. And if you needed to contextualize some of that information, you could pull in data from our CRM, right? And I remember I got to that point in the presentation where I was showing the group what is possible. And I went over a brief architecture overview and all the different systems that were required in order to do this. And I got to the end of that, and my point was, that's cool, right? It's really cool to build something like that. But you don't want to optimize for cool, especially if you don't need it. So interesting in this particular situation, before these documents get created as PDFs, they exist as a spreadsheet with data and rows and columns that would be, I don't want to say easily read because the format would need to be changed. It would need to be flattened out. But it exists in a format that lends itself to data extraction, data manipulation, right? Importing to other systems. But there is a process in place that converts that from an easy to read format to a much more complex format, especially when it comes to pulling data out. And then you built overhead on top of that to try to get back to the source data that would have been more readily available had you not converted it to a PDF in the first place. So my point to them was, before you look at this from we have to go from the PDF forward, right? How can we extract the maximum amount of information out of the PDF? You should really look at your originating system and determine, do we need to work from the PDF, or could we potentially work from the spreadsheet, right? Or even better, and what I did in this demo was built a quick little web app that basically took the spreadsheet form, turned it into a web app, and all the information would be input into a web application that would reside in what would ultimately be some type of database, whether it's relational or not, that could then be used to do all of the fancy AI goodness, right? Whether that is video scripts or, models to interpret the data, or, come up with key findings or trends. All of that would be much easier if the information was structured in a way that was more readily accessible for whatever the AI tool might be that you want to point at it. So I say all of this because there's a tremendous amount of focus on this app can do this and that app can do that, and you can turn this into that. And that's great, right? That's great. But if you automate a mess, right, you just are making a mess even faster than you were before, right? If you're pointing an AI model, whatever it might be, at a mess of data, the last thing you want are quick answers because they're probably going to be incorrect if it doesn't have the right context, if the data is inconsistent, right? If the formatting is not right, if the dimensions aren't consistent, right? You can point really smart tools at really bad information and get incorrect insights. And I think that gets glossed over a lot because we're so excited to use the tool and just point the tool at something and then it tells you something and you have no idea how it actually got to that point. I remember back when I worked at a company called Seer Analytics, we were building a model that would predict the member penetration for new locations. So a gym was going to put a location in a new, or you're going to put a new location in a couple different sites. We would run basically socio-demographic models to predict what we thought the penetration range would be, right? Here within 1 or 2 standard deviations, right? So people could get a guess for, is the location sustainable? And I remember I was talking with, this is probably 10 years ago, talking with a brilliant electrical engineer who was a very sophisticated modeler. And at the time, neural nets were really, really big. And I remember him explaining it to me. And the way that he was explaining it is basically like, well, you put the information inside a black box, and then the black box does what it does, and it gives you an answer. And that answer might be the best. The biggest downside is that you can't explain it. So oftentimes the most efficient model, right? Because the client has to be able to believe and understand and interpret the results, is not a neural net. Even if the performance is better, it is some other type of, whether it's regression analysis, etc., that you could explain. You could say, well, we did this and then this and then this and then this, and that's how we arrived at this number. Because then the client can wrap their head around it. And the biggest, I think, risk associated with a lot of these chat models and just AI tools in general is that all of the work is hidden behind this cool web interface, and then you get a result set out. And if you're not fairly confident in the source system that this model is running against, those results might not be reliable or dependable. You might not want to take action on them. So something that I've really been spending a lot of time on is this like illusion of efficiency, right? It's like the seduction of AI and automation, dashboards, triggers, chatbots, workflows, etc., that would ultimately, if pointed at broken business systems, right, are just going to further the damage of those broken systems or abstract away the knowledge that a system was even broken to begin with, right? Instead of automating a 10-step process, it would be much more efficient to eliminate 4 of the steps that are unneeded and have a 6-step process that you then look at automating versus just taking it at face value and saying, oh, sure, I can just create a chatbot that can do all 10 of those things. Well, do you really need to do all 10? Maybe, but maybe not. So I think that with so many tools out there, right, it's very easy to get overwhelmed. It's also very easy to get in situations where people can't really articulate the workflows. And when you get into these complex or subjective workflows, it's very easy for automations to break with just a single change because you haven't spent the time to really codify your business system to say, yes, step 1, 2, 3, 4, this is always what we do. This is always the source system. This is always the result. This is how we want this to work all the time. If there's an exception, do this. But that's how you're handling the exceptions. But most things should run under this set of parameters. So that is something that I really see a lot of companies falling into is again, the illusion of efficiency, right? Because it's automated or because you have an AI agent doing some work. Well, if the work wasn't required to begin with, well, then it's still a waste of time, right? The next thing that I just wanted to reiterate is that simplicity really is what scales, right? The difference between, streamlining a system and automating a system, again, to my previous point, I would spend just as much, if not more time trying to streamline your business systems before you worry about automating them, because that's where the true value is going to be. That's where you're really going to uncover the unnecessary work. So yeah, maybe automating this solution would have saved you a couple hours a week, but eliminating 3 or 4 unneeded steps might save you a few hours a day. So I would really, really focus on trying to get your business systems and workflows as simple as possible so that you literally can draw them out as like a workflow diagram before you ever worry about AI incorporation into that workflow or even trying to automate it, right? I think that another thing is really trying to focus specifically on the automation side on clean automations, right? And what I mean by clean automation, and this goes back to, I just had this conversation a couple weeks ago about a dashboard that we were building. And it was like, okay, well, do we want to pre-calculate the data and then just have the dashboard show the results? Or do we want the ETL job, right? The job that is transforming the data from the database to the visualization. Do we want that to do the work? Now, you might think, well, it doesn't really matter as long as the numbers end up correct. But the problem is that it'd be very hard to check the ETL job to make sure that the result set makes sense on the fly, because the source data that you have in the table is one set of information, and then you see the result in the dashboard, and that would be fundamentally different. So what we always try to do, to the greatest extent possible, calculate these things, land them, and then present them. And the reason that you do that is because I don't want my automation to have to be super, super smart. I want it to do the work, but I want to abstract away any unnecessary complexity for auditing, right? For making sure that, I have data consistency and integrity. So trying to get to a place where you have as clean of automation as possible. I remember one of the first jobs I was building, I was trying to convert that PDF text in and extract it using some JSON tool that would put it in some other format. And then the JSON array was like nested, and I had to break it out in all these different ways. And it was just such a mess that, could I do it? Absolutely. Was it fraught with areas where it would possibly fail if just one thing was changed? Yeah, it was. So that, again, is not a good process to try to automate, right? That is not a clean set of automation. I mean, really what you want to be able to do is, to the greatest extent possible, like I said, you want to be able to clearly define, clearly articulate, draw out that workflow. If this, then that, have decision matrices in place so that you can understand exactly what is going to happen. Because once you start removing the subjectivity and you don't have the human in there that can make the decision, and you're relying on the automation, the last thing you want is it making assumptions based on what it think you might want to do. Now, could you get to a point where you have it doing that, and maybe you have a human in the loop system and it's presenting you with ideas and you're providing feedback and it gets smarter and smarter? Sure. Would I start with that? Absolutely not. Right? Absolutely not. I would 100% start with the cleanest possible automation workflows that you can, just to get comfortable doing it and thinking about your existing workflows in such a way that they could be automated, right? That you could incorporate maybe some AI to layer on top of something that's existing, because you know that you feel good about that source system or that source content. So a few key takeaways here. And again, this is from somebody who's an early adopter, right? I love this technology. I think it will absolutely help a lot of people, but I think it will also bury a bunch of broken business problems and lead to bad decisions, because people are throwing a tool that says it's AI at garbage data and getting a result, and then doing something based on that result. And before you know it, you're just creating a mess. But the biggest problem is you can't see it until you see the result. And depending on what that result is, that could have, negative implications on your business, on your customers, etc. So I would really, really think about trying to simplify your systems to the greatest extent possible. Only automate the most simple and direct workflows, especially to start. If you're just using Zapier for the first time ever, try to pick a workflow that's like 2 or 3 steps and that's it. Even potentially have it kick off manually or on a timer so that you know, okay, 9 o'clock, this job's going to run. Let me go into HubSpot and check to make sure that all these jobs, or all this data came through. Send yourself emails so you get notifications so you know to check something, right? You know that it ran or you know that it failed. Those things definitely will help, right? Because automation and AI, those are tools. But if you use the wrong tool for the wrong job, you're not going to be happy with the result. So 100% take that into consideration. I would absolutely take a step back before you find a problem, right? Because you found this cool solution online, and really think through that workflow, that business process, that source system data to really clean those up to the greatest extent possible. And then sure, start exploring automation, right? Start exploring some of these AI tools that can get plugged into your systems to increase insights, right? This just came up the other day, the Breeze functionality inside of HubSpot, right? Could that be helpful to someone who's trying to better understand any of the data that's inside of HubSpot? Absolutely. But if your pipeline is garbage, if your company data is garbage, if your contact data is garbage, if you're not consistently putting in call notes, or if the call notes that you are putting in wild, or very wildly based on the individual that's putting them in, how good of a job is Breeze really going to be able to do if you can't rely on the source data in the system, right? So is that an exceptional tool? Absolutely. Could it be very powerful? Yes, it can. But it could never go back and create the data, right, that is supposed to be input from the users or from a secondary system somewhere. So just really think through that. Again, automation should be simple to start. Your AI use cases, point them at systems, processes, data that you know are in good condition. Now, there are going to be people that are like, no, it can do it for you. Maybe, but if you can't figure out how to clean your data up manually, do you really want to rely on some AI bot to go in there and just do whatever it thinks is right? There's a reason that they teach you how to do long division by hand before you get to use the calculator. And I think that's probably the best analogy that I can make when it comes to automation or AI. You have to have some understanding, some appreciation for the source data and how that should work, how it should be cleaned up, how it should be structured, what it means, what types of insights you want to pull from it before you try to start automating or layering in AI on top of said systems. So hopefully this helps. Hopefully it saves you some pain, because I know this all too well. I've seen it happen too many times. People fall in love with a solution, then go find a problem to solve with it. And before you know it, you are making a mess even faster, and you are just automating garbage in and garbage out. And that is not where you want to be. So if you enjoyed this episode, please consider subscribing, sharing this with a friend. All those things help us reach a greater audience. Until next time, stay smart.